For those of you who are just joining us, good afternoon. My name is Andrea Lawful-Sanders. I am the Mistress of Ceremonies today for this two-day convening, Journalism Reimagined, Intentions and Tensions, Engaging Philadelphia Communities. This is going to be the session, the panel discussion that we're having today. We're going to have Chris Norris from WHYY and NICE up here, and TaRhonda Thomas from 6ABC. All righty. Move over.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to be standing up.
See, Chris is messing with me. I am going to, in full disclosure, tell you that I've known Chris Norris for quite a few years. Donna Frisbee Greenwood, if any of you know who she is, she's getting ready to lead a fund here in Philadelphia, called me some years ago and said, there's a young man that's starting an online journalism publication called Tech Book Online. And she says, I swear you'd be an excellent mentor for him. I haven't mentored him one day. We argue. I tell him I am more moderate than he is in our discussions about politics. He treats me to chicken wings every once in a while. And we fight, right? Just like regular folks should do. But I absolutely adore him, and I believe that he is ripe for this conversation. TaRhonda, I just met, and I am looking forward to the dialogue. Now, TaRhonda, you may have seen me having a conversation with some of your 6ABC folks. That's because they have been #1 in the news market since Jesus was a boy, literally. And in order for you, and in order for you to be #1 in the news market, that is a black colloquialism, by the way. So, in order for you to be #1 in the news market, you literally have to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. So today, this conversation, let me sit down. You ready?
I'm ready, for sure.
All right. So we're going to talk about exploring significant efforts between by WHYY and 6ABC to authentically engage with Philadelphia communities. So let's go. Okay. So good afternoon to the both of you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I suspect you're both ready because we have had dialogue over the last few weeks, and we've had some about 25 minutes ago about what we need to talk about. It is important to me, particularly as your moderator, and more largely to your room, that this conversation is as authentic as you can make it. I am keeping in mind that you work for large organizations, so I'll try not to get you fired.
Okay, where's the little blue dot? Is there a little blue dot on my face?
I will work really hard not to get you fired, because understanding that you are both people of color and that you have lived experiences and what comes along with that, there are things that we're going to have to talk about. You know, how are you engaging the communities that you serve, and what roles do you play in all of this? So I'm going to let ladies first. TaRhonda, tell us about your role at 6ABC and how you got there.
Thank you for having me, Andrea, and thank you for the Lenfest Institute hosting this conversation, because it's so important. And I see people in the room who, you know, we see each other out on events, on stories. I know, Kathy, I call you a lot as NAACP president, but we don't get the chance often to engage in this type of space. So I appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to hearing, you know, what people have to say and what they want to know so that I can contribute, because I've been benefiting from so many people's knowledge and willingness to talk to me. So I'm the race and culture reporter for 6ABC. That's a brand new position. I only started, oh, thank you. Nice. Thank you. I'm the first one. I only started less than a year and a half ago. And the way that it happened was, it was not by my design at all. I moved here to Philadelphia a few years ago from Denver, Colorado. I've been in news for over 20 years, and when I was in Denver, I was at a station that is known across the country just for its thoughtful storytelling and its different approach to news. Like our 5 o'clock newscast did not have traffic, weather, not one car crash. It was all think pieces and human interest and things that challenged you as a viewer. So that station, even before I worked there, influenced the way that I wanted to approach news and the journalist I wanted to be. And I've done a lot of studying and workshops with like the Poynter Institute and just how to be more thoughtful. And when I got my master's degree from the University of Denver, in media, film, and journalism studies, a big part of it was, in my research, was looking at how people see us and what our impact is. And it was much different from what I thought and what I was intending. So that really changed my focus on things. But moving here to Denver was kind of a jump. Or I'm sorry, here to Philadelphia, was a jump because I was in Denver for 11 years at a great station, had a very comfortable position, but I was not satisfied with the opportunities that I felt like I wasn't given the chance to compete for. So that motivated me to jump here without a job. Well, my husband did have a job, but that it led me to talk to every single station and try to figure out where I was going to land. And so 6ABC was where I landed. First of all, part-time, really after taking 6 months off just to focus on my kids, my family, and learning who I was outside of this job, because that's a big lesson to learn when you do a job like this. You just get wrapped up in it and thinking like this is what you do is who you are. And I really appreciated the time to learn that that's not true. And so when I started, I was just part-time for maybe like a couple years. And there was a listing for race and culture reporter. I saw it and I was like, have fun with that, good. Like somebody's gonna get it and I'll just keep my little part-time gig and keep pedaling along because it just wasn't something I thought about, even though these were the types of stories that I was doing in Denver in February. That's what I was relegated to. And then one day, Christine, our assistant news director, called me and said, hey, there's this position, I don't know if you've seen it, it's been open for like 8 months, and we just keep interviewing and looking and looking and looking, and we thought, is there somebody right under our nose that we're not looking at? And that's how my name came up. And I thought about it over the weekend, whether I would apply, and it was scary because it was not a turn that I saw for myself. But in the end, when I accepted, I remember telling our news director, I said, I think this is the evolution that I need, that I didn't anticipate, but that I needed. So that's how I started in this position.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for you. Just give me one. I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a second. You said something that piqued my interest. It was a position that was open for 8.5 months. To what do you owe that it wasn't filled? Why do you think, even you, when you saw it, said, good luck with that, peace out? To what do you owe that no one really wanted to touch this position?
Well, it's not that no one wanted to touch it because they had hundreds of applications.
Oh, so then what happened?
Yeah, they were looking for the absolute right person. They didn't just want to put a body in a seat and say, you're going to report on Black stuff, Asian stuff, LGBTQ stuff. They wanted the right person in it. Now, I don't know exactly how, what I did, but when I got here, I came with a lot of intention. Everything I do is with intention, and it wasn't to get that certain job, but that is what was absorbed, and I'm glad that they thought of me with that, because then that means I was trying to do meaningful work. But there were a lot of people interested, and this is I didn't mention, this is a national group. Right. So there are, I think, 6 other reporters like me across the country, all working for ABC, and I was the last one to kind of fill that piece of the puzzle because they really wanted to be intentional about who they hired.
Well, bravo to 6ABC for being intentional. And I'm saying that because oftentimes we put people in positions that don't necessarily fit where they're supposed to be, and it becomes this round robin thing where folks are like, this is not working, which is probably why they're #1 in the market for such a long time.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah. Chris, introduce yourself, please.
I tell the story.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Chris Norris, also go by thank you. Also go by Flood or Flood the Drummer. And I started my career in news. It was the Occupy Philly movement that really was the launch for me. Prior to that, I was a professional drummer. That's where the name comes from. And I thought I was going to be a WWE superstar. I look every day.
God, I love WWE.
Oh my God.
Friday night, I go to SmackDown. Yeah, okay, we'll talk later.
We're going to be friends. Every day I still like, how did I get here? Right. But I love storytelling. I love media. And I came back to Philly in 2009 after living in Texas. I was working for Apple, and saw that there was a void in my community from storytelling, particularly around police, politics, and protests. And that spoke to me, and I felt like nobody was covering it, and those who were covering it weren't covering it right. And so I indulged. I went down to Target for $139, bought a Kodak ZI-8 camera with a little USB and a little $20 tripod, and just set up right next to all the big camera guys. And I'll never forget, one of the cameras, I think it was a CBS guy, he looks at me, he goes, no one's ever gonna take you serious with that little camera. He goes, nobody wants to talk to a small camera, they all want the news cameras. I said, I bet you in 10 years, everybody will be using this, right? Now, everybody's using the phone. I said, I don't want to carry that thing up and down City Hall. You guys are crazy. But I took an incredibly untraditional route, to say the least. I was very antagonistic, aggressive, kind of guerrilla journalism. You know, we were counterculture at the time. Now everybody can be outrageous, and that's just the thing. But you know, we really mastered being outrageous, and so much so that people are still surprised that I'm at WHYY. They don't quite get it. But so we covered really important stories around police politics and protests. The Brandon Tate Brown case, you know, we were all on top of that. We led the coverage on David Jones, so much so that we inspired the other outlets to cover David Jones. Nobody wanted to touch these police killings. Nobody wanted to challenge the city on their body camera policies and all these other kind of things like that. So we jumped deep in it. And we did it from a community-first approach. I always considered myself a community member who was committing acts for journalists and not a journalist, right? That whole kind of term of committing acts for journalism is kind of what we use with NICE. Became so much so that when we would go to, there would be community town halls and such, there would be a part that we opened to the media, and then they'd go, everybody has to leave. And then some of the people go, well, what about Flood? Oh no, he's part of the community. So like, I value that they saw me as a journalist second and a part of the community first, and that was kind of what I wanted to take on. So I did that for 10 years. Fast forward to 2019, I decided that it was time to do something new, and I called up Sandy Clark, who was then the VP of News at WHYY. I saw this position that was open. Shout out to Sandy Clark, man. She changed my life, you know. So I told her, I said, you know, I see this job. I think I'd be perfect for it. And she goes, she goes, you? She says, I don't think you would fit in at WHYY. She said, you're kind of like, you're a maverick. You're kind of out there. She said, but I respect you enough. She says, look, we were just drafting a offer letter to the candidate who applied. She says, out of respect, I'm going to let you interview. And I walked in, and with intention, I said, in my interview with her and another person, I said, look, you guys got a problem, and I want to help you solve it. And if you hire me, I promise to, work with integrity, but I'm not trying to fit in. I'm trying to change the culture. And I think that was what they needed to hear. So it'll be 3 years in November.
Yeah. I asked Christopher to share his story intentionally because oftentimes when we think about journalism, we say, you have to go to journalism school. Did you go to journalism school?
I did not. I went to the school of the hard knocks.
Yeah. And this is why we're having this conversation now around tensions and intentions. There has been quite a bit of conversation in traditional newsrooms that people who didn't go to journalism school should not be journalists. Yes, I'm going there. And there has been quite a bit of pushback from folks who said, I spent all my time and energy in journalism school, and where did you come from? And I can't respect the work that you've done. To the other side of that, though, I had a conversation with Luann Khan, who was an NBC 10 news reporter for almost 40 years, and another one with Lorraine Ballard-Morrill, who is the communications director for iHeartMedia. These are my friends. I mean, we've been friends for over a decade. And one of the things that Luann said to me yesterday was that newsrooms are suffering because they have to reimagine what it looks like in terms of journalism, that we're not going into the communities and really meeting people and reaching them where they are. And folks are not wanting to stay in journalism because it's so hard and there's no money attached to it. There's not enough compensation attached to it to make you want to stay. So my first question is this. What is your thought around traditional journalism versus the school of hard knocks? I'm asking you first, and then I'm asking you, TaRhonda.
What's the difference? Or?
No.
I just want to understand the question.
So, really?
No, I just want to make sure I answer right.
What are your thoughts around traditional journalism versus the school of hard knocks? Do you agree that you need to have a journalism degree in order to report the news in your community and your lived experiences?
Got it. I don't think that you need a degree to do most things, except do heart surgery and fly to the moon. I think journalism is one of the most basic acts of civic engagement that you can do. Now, that's saying that you don't need a degree to do journalism is not the same as saying you don't need training, and you don't need best practices, and you don't need guidance, right? You have to have some guardrails. But to pretend that you have to go to school 4 years in order to keep your community informed is the kind of elitist culture that newsrooms suffer from, right? When I got to WHYY, there was so much tension, unspoken, because Sandy and I had conversations when she announced my hiring. So many people was like, he's not a real journalist. And I go, what the hell does that mean? What does a real journalist mean? I'm out there with everybody else in the rain, in the snow, on the front lines, covering stories. I'm standing up to the police. I'm hosting community conversations in town halls. You guys are coming to me for sources, right? What does a real journalist mean? And it was that I didn't have the academic attainment, but I had the lived experience, right? And so many newsrooms don't validate lived experience unless they are coming to you for a source. But what I believe, and this is one of the guiding principles of the news and information community exchange, is our audience can be our collaborators. And that communities aren't just consumers of news and information, but producers of it. And you have to acknowledge that the people in communities across the city, they are telling their own stories in part because they have to, because there are people in newsrooms with the degrees who don't want to go there.
Well.
Well, as a person with 2 degrees, I'm going to say you shouldn't undercount the value of a degree, because with that degree comes the knowledge and the training on how to execute the craft. That's what I think is the most important part about the degree, not necessarily where you get it or that you have it, but you learn whether it's the lingo, whether it's the ethics, whether it's the law, whether it's how to put together a story, a package. What does that mean? If someone tells me to go out and do a Nat Bosat, what does that mean? Learning those things and having the curve to be not just educated, but mentored by good teachers. So that's learning the craft. That's the value of a degree. Now, the value of my master's degree was outside of that. That was not the craft. It was understanding the perception and more of the academic side of what we do. And it gave me a chance to focus and study something outside of myself. So I personally do value it. Is that the only thing you need in order to work? No, because there's some people who have degrees who are really bad at this. But I do think that it's an important thing to acknowledge, but you don't necessarily have to make it everyone has to have a degree, but how can you show up and be good at executing the craft next to someone who's been there for 20 years and who's learned everything? It's going to be 2 different planes, but that being said, on some of those platforms, that's what you need. So, for instance, how many video blogs and things on YouTube get so many hits, and they are news, but it's that person presenting it and processing it in their own lens, in their own tone, which you cannot do at a TV station. Like it's not up to you to put your opinion out there. It's up to you to find the opinions and then present them evenly and adequately. Like if I'm doing a political story, come look at my logs, because I log every single thing every person says, and I never they always have the same amount of sound bites, and I never let there be any more than 3 seconds difference in the amount of time someone has. And in my philosophy, no one gets the last word. There won't be a person on one side or the other saying the last thing in the story. How did I learn that? Through getting my degree and learning my craft.
So how do you marry both? How do you marry your degree and your craft with embracing people who did not get those degrees but are able to tell the stories from the community lens?
You value everybody, value what they have. Okay. So I know that Chris has skills that I don't have, and he has sources that I don't have, and I appreciate his authenticity, and that's something I never want to lose in myself. Like I'm always going to be me, like always, no matter what story I'm doing, it's still going to be me at the heart of it. And Chris has that bandwidth to be able to be even more of himself, because he's not constrained by, the lingo and, doing this part. You have more of a wide thinking approach to things, and that's something I feel like I can pull from and learn from to be more of a free thinker, and then put that into how I do what I do in order to follow the guidelines to make sure that, we hold ourselves accountable to both sides, and don't get sued too. Like there's a different level of accountability when you're with a major news group. They may not go after, so-and-so who has 1,000 followers, but they will go after 6 ABC. So that's a different level of accountability too.
No, I agree, and I don't think it's a either or. It's a both and, that's the whole point of really trying to create a rich ecosystem, is acknowledging the contributions that everybody plays. And I think when you bring the degreed and the people with academic attainment and the people with lived experience, and you bring them together, you create a transference of human capital, But you also create what I like to call a cognitive surplus, where everybody gets to come together and you create this brain trust, this brain power, where you get to really think through complex ideas and complex stories, and you get to create informal and formal mentorship opportunities. I'm sure there's a ton I could learn from you, right? You know, and exchange, right? And exchanging things. What we've done is we've created two separate things, right? The people with lived experience who didn't go to school, they're not seen as real journalists. They're citizens journalism. We come up with all this colloquialism for them, and they're over there. And then there's the legitimate journalists, right? And they're over there. And that creates more harm than good, I think, because we're only legitimate when we're legitimate to the academic attainment group when they need something, right? When they need a source or they need an introduction to the community, then we're real, right? Then our connections to the community actually mean something. Then our voice actually means something. But when we're trying to tell a story, we don't know enough. So I think we have to shed a little bit of the pride and the rules, just a little bit, and leave a little bit of room for growth and grace.
Growth and grace. Hashtag growth and grace. Growth and grace. So now I want you both to talk a little bit about your respective roles. The Race and Culture Desk, what does that look like? And let me tell you why I'm asking this. I have been circulating the room and talking to people, and there are folks who worked in large media organizations that says, you know, they've gone out, like the uprisings that were happening during George Floyd, and so much was going on there. We've seen all sorts of things. And this one particular person said they went and they wrote the story, described what happened. Someone with a SWAT sticker, you know, made racial statements, and when they wrote it into the story, they were told to take it out. That it didn't work in the story, and then said, why would you label someone as racist? Well, how if I called you a welfare queen? And I'm sharing that without saying where it came from, because these are the things that are happening across newsrooms. When we bring our college degrees and our lived experiences, sometimes we're met with the kind of resistance that bespeaks to not engaging or welcoming us into the spaces, even though we've worked hard to get there. So tell me a little bit about the Race and Culture Desk, and what are some of the challenges that you're having with, and what are some of the successes that you're having? And then I need you to talk about NICE.
Okay.
All right.
I want to hear more about NICE. The experiences like that, first of all, unfortunately, I will say, where doesn't that happen? I have friends who work across industries who are constantly fielding microaggressions and things at work. So that it's not exclusive to news, but it definitely, it does happen where you get challenged and you get pushed back, and that has happened. I've had to, for instance, at a previous station, go in and explain why Assad is a soundbite, that they thought was harmless, and a little cute little boy who's giving away blue light bulbs. And he's like, oh, for support police because all lives matter. And as soon as I heard that, I went into the news director and said, let's have a conversation. Let me tell you why that's actually not as even of a soundbite as it sounds. So it is constant work, even if you're not in my role, even if you're not in news, to continuously have a conversation and to educate. And that's unfortunately like a burden that a lot of people of color take on. When it comes to the role that I'm in now, at least I know that I have a dedicated space where my voice is expected to be heard. So every morning editorial meeting, when we're deciding what stories are going to get told, I'm in that meeting, and even if it's outside of my story, I will say, hey, on this story, we might want to think about XYZ. For example, one of the most recent ones I could think of in the meeting is when the Queen died, and the next day, we're in the meeting, they're talking about coverage, and at the end of that conversation, I said, just so you know, Black Twitter is trending right now. So is Irish Twitter, and everything that I've taken in overnight is the opposite of this because of Great Britain's history of colonization and because of their brutality when it came to nations that are decolonizing and people who are still alive, you know, from Kenya who survived atrocities. But it really was the point was I said, not everybody's processing this the same. So even if that's not a story right in that moment, to say not everybody's processing this the same is to put that idea out, and that's not just accepted but expected for me to come and speak and give a lens. So I appreciate being able to do that. In addition to, my job is to find the stories that are within my beat, whether they be hard news, whether they be more human interest, and then bring them out to the forefront. And I do get like a pretty good amount of space to like be creative, to find the stories, but I'm also the person who should be there and the go-to and available when there is a story that's within my beat that's big. And what I've worked on this whole year is developing those contacts, those trust, people within the community like Kathy, that I could even just call and bend their ear and say, hey, what do you think about this? Even if it's not a story. So it's from editorial meetings to coming up with my own stories, to being there to respond quickly, and to continue working a story like, for instance, Fontability. And that story, it's gut-wrenching for an 8-year-old girl to be shot to death by police while she's at a high school football game, and to stick with a story like that and talk to them enough that her mother trusted me to come into their home and speak with her like that. That's the type of thing, even though it may not seem like that's an obvious race and culture story, it is. It absolutely is. And it's my job to kind of keep some of those stories on or to the forefront that we may not have had time or space for before. Now we are making the time and space for those stories.
Good. All right, what about you? Let's talk about NICE, and what are some of the challenges that you've had and some of the successes?
Yeah.
Did you talk about challenges?
I thought I did.
You did?
Do you want to hear some more challenges? I know no shortage of them.
All right, we'll come back to your challenges. So let's talk a little bit now about NICE. How did that come about? I happen to know Sandy Clark.
Yeah.
If you've not met that woman, just phenomenal, completely outside of the spaces where we thought things shouldn't happen. She will reach out to people who are not traditional in the news spaces to get what needs to be done. So tell us about NICE. How did that come about?
Well, let me just first say, like you, we're first. I'm the first managing editor for community engagement at WHYY. And the WHYY that exists today is not the WHYY that I walked in the doors to.
Okay.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
And I hear it from people all the time that say, man, WHYY, what you guys are doing there is different. It feels different. It looks different. And that matters, right? And that's what I wanted to hear when I applied 3 years ago and I said there's a problem and I want to fix it, right? So NICE is only one part of my job. I oversee the engagement activities in the newsroom. That includes NICE, which is our journalism collaborative, mutual aid journalism collaborative for grassroots content creators. I also oversee Bridging Blocks, which is our partnership with the Free Library of Philadelphia. It's a community conversation series. We're developing a internal tool called the Guide to the Grassroots that it's a source database that allows our journalists and our partners to better connect to grassroots leaders. I also manage the op-ed section for WHYY.org, and I produce and host community conversations for broadcast and digital.
And you sleep when?
I actually sleep really well because I figured out how to do this, and pick my days right. So I have to plan and produce TV shows. I have to think about strategies for NICE. But NICE was one of those things that, I got hired in November of 2019, and by December of 2019, Sandy and I were brainstorming this thing, right? Because she said to me, there's got to be more people like you who commit acts of journalism on behalf of their neighbors and friends, who do it from the bootstrap, who are grassroots to the core, and who do not get the respect or the acknowledgement by mainstream media, who are said that they're not real journalists, and we shun them out. And so the initial thought was what if we just catalog? What if we just find and catalog all these individual content creators in the city and create a database just so that we know we're there? And shout out to Roxanne Stafford, who at the time was the program manager for the Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. And she challenged us to think about what's the next level of engagement for us, right? Like you're already doing essays, the community people have a voice, you're amplifying community voice, but what's the next step? And Sandy and I, there's this infamous story about this whiteboard session where we spent the entire afternoon on the whiteboard mapping things out. And we thought about it's not enough to just find these content creators. What if we brought them into community? What if we created a mutual aid context? What if we provide training? And what if we found a way to do a hardcore integration of their talent and their content into our production and programming? When I tell people that from other public media, they go, wait, you're actually going to take people who are not your employees and not in your journalism and figure out ways to include them? And it's because they don't think that that's just not how it thought, right? But I think about when I was a grassroots content creator, right? When I was on the ground with Saj Purple Blackwell at City Hall and doing the press conferences, I wish that there was an infrastructure like that to support what I was doing. I wish there was an acknowledgement that when we don't have to be competition, we can be complementary, that I have really, really deep community ties and your newsroom doesn't. Is there a way that we can benefit each other? What would mutual aid look like? And I'm really good at acronyms, and so Sandy came up with a lot of the crux of it, and as I'm reading it, I said, News and Information Community Exchange. Nice, mutual aid, it just plays, and she was like, that's it, right? And then, you know, the rest is history.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. It was important to talk about NICE because WHYY, I believe, is doing something that has not been done in newsrooms anywhere, right? We're still having dialogue around this. So what are the challenges? I mean, Asajj Purple Blackwell, non-traditional.
But I will tell you,
hold
but
on.
Saj, wait, when I first got here and I first saw her, I'm like, oh, I don't know anybody. Who is that? But everybody knew
There
you.
you go.
Mayor Kenny came up,
Yeah.
hug, how you doing? I'm like, I think I need to know who she is. So she carries
Right.
it.
She is in the community. She is unapologetic with her voice. And yet when she was the only one that got the mayor to talk to her, all the news publications were trying, she was the only one that got the mayor to talk to her. She got pushback. Well, you're not a journalist. And people can be really harmful in this space. How do you create through WHYY a safe space for Saj and all the other folks, Eric and them, you know, to make sure that because they are going to get the pushback.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate through that in WHYY and outside?
Yeah, well, let me just say, shout out, I want to acknowledge Eric Marsh, who's here. I also want to acknowledge our VP of News, Sarah Glover. He's here in the building as well. I like to think of, you know, when we created NICE and Sandy and I started thinking about hiring, we were both very intentional. We didn't want to hire a journalist for the role.
Yes.
And we thought it was important to hire somebody with community organizing experience because that's what was at the core of NICE. Is like, how do we corral these people together and use some of the organizing best practices? And what would it look like even more so to have someone with organizing best practices in the newsroom helping us think about community engagement? We got 400 applicants for this position. 400. Probably 350 of them were journalists. and we painstakingly went through, well, I should say we, Sandy told me to do it. So we went through 2 rounds of reviewing 400 applicants.
Wow.
You know, it was this, you talk about intentionality. This was incredibly intentional because we knew what we wanted to create. And so we brought Eric on in I believe it was November of 2020.
Right.
And you know, it works, right?
Yes.
And he's managing the day-to-day of it and keeping the relationship with the partners. And I like to think of myself as an umbrella, right? To keep all of the BS and the rain from hitting the partners or anybody else on the team. I'll take the hit, right? And so that's how I create the safe space. And I think a lot of the partners, Saj, POC, they knew me as Flood. Right? They knew me showing up to the press conference with my hat backwards on a bike. Yeah. So, you know, it wasn't always sitting up in a blazer being on TV. So they was like, he's real.
Right.
Yo, and if you can get somebody like that in the door, he's going to keep the door open for other people. Absolutely. And so my pledge to myself was not to change and to every day work to create the space that I needed when I was doing it.
Wow. 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 So let's talk about the challenges. You've talked about the great things that are happening here. I don't want to sugarcoat this, and then I'm going to turn this over because I know you have questions, right? Right. Okay. So let's talk about the challenges. There are people who have some sort of a communication background, journalism background, but never finished journalism school, that have been sought after. You know, folks are choosing to go to Netflix or YouTube or wherever they can to make them money so that they can support themselves, because let's face it, this is hard work. There's nothing about journalism that says it's easy. You just get up and you push something out there and it works. And you have to create authentic relationships, which is why NICE is working so beautifully. In fact, did you win an award for NICE?
Our engagement team has won several awards and been nominated for more, but yes. And our community conversations, we launched community conversations 2 years ago, been nominated for 2 Emmys.
Wow.
And
Wait. You used to be on a bike with your hat backwards.
And I got 2 M's.
What is the lesson that you're learning here, though? For those of you who are in the audience listening to this and watching us virtually, what's the lesson here?
For me, there's more than one ways to skin a cat. It's just that simple. It's not about that you got to take the traditional route or that you have to be unconventional. It's that you can do what you need to do. And I mean, look, I have, and she wouldn't mind me saying this, Sherry Gregg at WHYY has become, I love having conversations with her. She came and told me one day when she got hired, we had a heart-to-heart. She goes, I thought you were insane. She said you were just showing up to these press conferences, throwing phones and cameras in people's faces on a bicycle. She said you broke every single rule of journalism. And I said to her, and we both ended up at the same place.
How about that?
Our desks are next door to each other, right? You're on the air, I'm on the air. And so it's not about right or wrong. It's about building an ecosystem where there's liberty and creative freedom and an acknowledgement that people can serve their communities in more than one way.
And I want to tap into that because that's why what Chris does has value, and we need Chris.
Yes.
And we need both of us.
Right.
Because what you do, it also depends on where you do it. So no matter how great the work is, where it's happening, not everyone's going to go on a certain platform to see it. We need people who also are in the mainstream who have the ability to represent and tell stories that are even and adequate and fair and represent other cultures, because my audience is not going to be the same as your audience. Because this is like habitual viewing where a lot of people, it's where people generationally turn to watch Channel 6. So if the best chance they have of encountering a story about someone who is outside of their community, a person they would never meet, a place they would never go, something they would never experience, is through Channel 6, then that comes through me. So my work is just as valid as Chris's work, and his work is just as valid as mine, because we're doing them on parallel platforms where the audiences do not necessarily intersect.
And just to that quick, because I have to shout out 6ABC, because you talk about intersecting
You
audiences.
did collaborate with them
We
recently.
collaborated on Confronting the Crisis, right? Nikki Hawkins, and that was, me and Shari Williams was hosting that together, and I thought that was a brilliant use of collaboration with public media and commercial media, of deep, WHYY with deep community ties, and 6ABC with deep community ties, but more importantly, the ability to produce and turn around quickly, right? We can't move as fast as 6ABC. We don't have the capacity, right? And so it's about doing what you do well and partnering with people who do it better. And that's why that made sense, and we're actively having that conversation about what it looks like doing it again. And the audience, because we're really all here in service of the audience. The audience was listening to that and watched that and was like, wow, right? Exceeding expectations. How'd you guys partner with 6ABC? You know what I mean? We're the small guys in the market to a degree, right? But I think for me, what that partnership represented more than anything, because we'll talk about the challenges, but I also want to lift up one more success, was that production of Confronting the Crisis preceded the hiring of Sammy Kayola, who's our gun violence prevention reporter. And you guys should all get a chance to talk to Sammy. When I got to WHYY, we didn't cover gun violence, really, and it was a source of frustration for me as somebody who, grew up in the hood, who was watching the news stories, who saw a lot of my friends die, right? I can put can't even count how many friends I went to high school with who are now just names in the paper. And I had a level of urgency about this that wasn't always reflected in the newsroom. And I remember talking to people in the organization, just trying to understand better, why aren't we covering gun violence? Like, this is a city issue. And it was, just don't do that, right? And some people would say it was alienating our core audience. And we know what that's coded for, right? Wealthy white people in the suburbs don't want to hear about Black death. But is that all who we're serving, right? So we go from not covering it really to hiring a gun violence prevention reporter, then hiring another gun violence prevention reporter through Report for America, to producing Neighbors in the Crossfire, which was nominated for an Emmy in 2021, and then producing Confronting the Crisis, right? And so now it's become a core part of what we do, and then more importantly, it's become a core expectation of what people want to see from us.
Right. Okay, so thank you, because what you have done, I remember having a conversation about what's happening with our newsrooms, and one of the things that I read a report from WHYY where they were just really confronting what's happening, that their core group of people, like TaRhonda's talking about, the core group that would watch are aging out, and we need to be able to acknowledge and access other people in the community, which is why your role is so important. Are you inviting other folks in to share news, or do they share it with you and you share it out too?
You know, I always am looking for stories, and I always have conversations with people. I'm not sure about like what you mean, like having like a forum or
So no,
something
sort of like
that,
what WHYY is doing. You know, it's
Yeah.
unheard of. It's happening now. So,
like with the
yes.
NICE program,
Yes.
like that's not something that's actively in the works here, but this is the way to do something like that, by partnering with NICE and then having the benefit of your umbrella, like you mentioned, so that, you know, we know that, you know, you've looked into and vetted people and know who's involved in the community and who can represent certain perspectives and points, and we balance that with what we have and our expertise and ability to turn things around. But I don't know if I foresee, you know, having people come in from the community. I don't know if that's above my head, but I do know we had an online discussion, for instance, where we were talking, and one person, it was during Hispanic Heritage Month last year, and one of the people recommended, oh, why don't you have community interns, where it's people coming in and, you know, interning with the station, but more so interning as a link to their neighborhoods to say, here's what's important to us. And here, as you know, in Philadelphia, like if people don't know you, you're not from their neighborhood, it's hard to break in. That's something I had to learn the hard way. And it's taken years to like gain people's trust, but you gain their trust by consistently being there. And I am the first to say, like, I'm not from here, from nowhere around here. I'm from Louisiana. Like, I talk slow, walk slow, cook a lot. But if you trust me to let me in, I promise I won't do wrong by you. So that's what we constantly try to represent. But having something like that, whether that's an intern or someone to link or someone like the NICE team, it's just something that has to be processed and worked through. But like you came in with a radical idea. Who knows where the next radical idea will come from?
Yeah, I think radical ideas are cherished and grow when you have radical thought leaders at the top. So that makes a difference. All right, we're going to open it up for some questions. Oh, Lord, listen now. Hold on, honey. Is there anyone who has not asked a question yet today that would like to ask one, and then I'll let go on over there. Andrea Wenzel.
Hi, I just had a quick question just based on two things you just both mentioned, or the community interns. I was just curious if you could share a little bit more about that and if they were paid or not. And then how do you address the radical thought leader at the top issue structurally, because that seems to be a potential challenge if you don't have a radical thought leader at the top. Do you have a wish list for addressing that in some way?
The community intern, that was just an idea that was brought up during COVID too. So unfortunately, it's not something that's been thought out through or executed. But I love the idea, and then gave feedback on, you know, maybe that's something that we could do. And as far as the radical thought leader, was that question directed towards me? Or either?
I mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one, because in news, you know, you typically have people who are at the top who have been working at these positions for decades and have earned their positions. So too, it's not like, you know, you're crowned this news director and that. You have people who've earned their positions. And so is it expected that they be pushed out because someone else wants to come in? Or an idea that I think is a good one is to grow that leader internally. So if you have someone who is in the newsroom who understands the process and the execution at the base level, but then has this yearning and these ideas and this fearlessness about them, you grow them through the managerial process. And that's something that I have been seeing in this newsroom and other newsrooms that I've been working in, especially when it comes to developing and growing people of color, because that's, I think, we're still in the single digits when it comes to like Black women who are news directors, for instance.
Okay, but so can we talk about that?
Yeah.
There are people of color in the journalism spectrum, in the field of journalism, that have not felt welcomed. Let's be honest. that have not felt welcomed in the spaces, even though they've earned the right to be there. That's why there are tensions happening. And then when you add that to the people in the community who says, you're only coming to our community to get the stories, and then you leave us here and there's really no major solutions, it's not a matter of, I think, of pushing people out of their roles, but asking them to completely reimagine the roles that they have known for so many years. At the very beginning of this summit, there was a talk, we had a panel discussion of national thought leaders here, and they said one of the things that needs to happen with journalism, if we are to remain relevant, is that we must completely reimagine how we have seen this, and we need to humble ourselves and talk to the people within our communities and the folks who have been trying to work so hard to find their niche. You know, you've done it beautifully, but it's not happening for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say that that you talked about necessarily pushing people out. To a degree, I am in favor of that.
You're in favor of what?
Pushing people out.
Oh, for the love of...
you have to have leaders who meet the moment. And the problem with so many institutions, whether it's media or government, is that we feel that people have earned their spot, and that spot is until they decide to move. Everything is temporary, right? And you are hired to do a job, but when the moment shifts, the culture shifts,
if you don't shift
if you
along,
can't adapt, then you are holding down the organization. And to say that we don't push you out simply because you earned your spot means that you are holding down the entire organization.
But you have to give someone a chance to grow and evolve too.
Yeah, so you have to
right now we're getting spicy.
Saying you don't meet the definition of what's in now, because that could very well happen to me. I've evolved in my career, but it may be someone who is, they come in hotter than I do, and that's more in style. Does that mean that I deserve to be in my position any less? Absolutely not, because I'm damn good at what I do, and I know how to do it.
So how do we do?
Which is why
I think that should be considered.
Hold on, excuse me, I'm still moderating. Because this is it's so interesting because you're both from different sides of this spectrum, right?
And we managed to wear coordinating outfits. Like, you see?
And yet, there is a middle ground here.
Yes.
There is a space for the both of you. So how can we bring in someone who may be spicier and have new thoughts without feeling like you're going to lose what you've worked so hard for? There has to be a middle ground.
It has to
How
be
can
in the
we
culture.
learn from each other is what I'm asking.
It has to be in the culture, of the newsroom or the environment to say, let's encourage and mentor one another. Those are the best environments that I've ever worked in, where someone who knew more than me mentored me, then the next person came in and I mentored them, and they brought their new ideas just as I brought mine. So that has to be encouraged, like a mentoring, and to purposefully bring in people who are different. But also, here's the thing, news moves really, really fast.
Yes.
So I don't have time to babysit you all the time. So you got to come in knowing what you're doing, but I can help be your compass. So you got to balance by bringing in someone who might be different, that's what you really want, but they can still pull their own weight, and then have some guidance on how to get them. We learn from each other.
And I just want to clarify, when I said push people out, I should use the term manage out, because push means immediate.
Because you're not pushing me.
I don't think anybody should just be pushed out their job
Right.
without given the chance to adapt.
Right.
But we've all read reports, and when we're reading the media trades, or we all know of people who do not want to adapt, who do not want to invest in digital, who don't want to invest in community, who don't want to do anything differently. And if they're telling you, I'm not adapting to this, I like what I do, I'm upholding the status quo, I've been here for 30 years, I'm comfortable, you have to begin to manage those people out.
Completely agree.
Okay.
Now that's
Well,
what yeah.
we have consensus.
So yeah, people can't change. You just got to give them a chance to evolve.
have to give them a
That's
chance
There you
to
it.
go.
evolve.
See what happens when we listen and we collaborate with one another and we got the point? This is amazing. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3. Okay, over here. Or is there someone
Denise
here?
Clay.
All right, hold on 1 second. Let me get Denise first, and then I'll get to you, okay? Sean, how much time do I have left,
Denise
please?
Clay Murray, I'm so sorry. Put respect on your name.
I don't know what that's about. And it kind of bugs my husband, but that's okay. As someone who is a former journalism professor, B, a longtime journalist of 30 years standing, and C, an independent journalist, which we have not talked about, I kind of want to bring that up because first of all, within the next 10 to 15 years, it depends on how generous I feel like being, everybody's going to be an independent contractor, because that's just the way the business is going. You've got to learn to manage yourself, because while it's nice that you all have jobs with benefits and all that stuff, I'm kind of on my own, which means if myself or someone like me is going to go into a community situation where they're a community reporter, the first question we got to ask is, okay, does this pay any money? Am I going to be able to keep a roof over my head in order to do this? So, and I guess I'm just directing this more so to you, Chris, because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you answer that question for people? Because let's face it,
just to clarify, what's the question?
The question is, you got people who are coming, who want to be storytellers from neighborhoods and tell the stories of neighborhoods where some of the city's abject poverty is kind of in your face. Mm-hmm. How do you do that in a way where they are able to be there to tell those stories, and yet they're not, having to ask people if they could borrow some money?
So they should be compensated, is what you're saying, each time they tell the story.
Because
got it.
Because in the words of the Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules everything around me.
Cream, get the money.
Dollar bill, y'all.
Well, I would just say that I respect the question, but it's not in my purview. I'm not hiring independent journalists, right? But I would say, well, members of NICE do get stipends, right? And they also, if they say they want to cover a story, we pay them the same rate we would pay a freelancer. Wow. And so not only are they getting stipends every month as just a respect for your time, right. If someone says, like a Josh Blackwell, who has, right? I mean, she got us the No Gun Zone interview. Doesn't even put his face on camera, and she, with the relationships, was able to do that. Same thing with POC. When POC joined, that's Proof of Consciousness. Her name is Tamara Russell, but she's a nice partner. Mm-hmm. She worked with our interns this summer to do a piece on the National Guard, mm-hmm. and showed our young people how to do women on the street interviews. We paid her the same rate we would pay if a former Enquirer writer said, I wanted to do this story. So you're right. I don't believe, because I'm always trying to create the kind of structure I needed. I wouldn't, if a journalist came to me and said, I wanted to tell this story, we're going to figure out how to compensate them. We may not compensate them at the rate they want, but we're certainly going to compensate them at our market rate and what we think is fair.
And it makes me think of, I have one really good friend, TaRhonda Thomas Whitfield, who's a freelance journalist who does everything from super local paper, Aurora Sentinel in Colorado, to Essence Magazine, and she worked her way up to that by really, really grinding. And when no one was hiring, she made her own way with her own news on her own website and kept her contacts going in the meantime. Now she's thriving now, but it was probably 8-9 years in the making of doing little things here and there and doing what she could to keep food on the table. But it was a constant grind. And so I would say you're an established journalist as well as a freelance journalist. You have the contacts and you have the context. So as a freelancer, you have that freedom, but you also have that, duty to try to do it yourself, but use what you already have and the resources of people you already know to show, like, this is my story and this is valuable, because you can be pitching those stories instead of waiting for them to come to you.
I do that. I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about myself. Mm-hmm. Freelance journalism is how I make my living. Mm-hmm. That's how I cook food on my table. Mm-hmm. But if you're a community member, right, and you're just learning this, that was why I asked the question, because while I know this stuff, mm-hmm. and because I've been a freelancer, and Chris can attest to this, mm-hmm. I've been a freelancer for over a decade. Mm-hmm. But if you're, if you want to tell stories and you're in a position where you may not have the contacts I do, or you may not have the sources I do, I just want to make sure that people understand. I just want to make sure that people are getting it while they're giving you stories. Mm-hmm. I just want to make sure that they get what they need, because
100%.
we're a city with a 26% poverty rate.
And we do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. So let me be very clear. Those of you who run newsrooms, if you are accepting stories from people, pay them. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't have to ask you if this is a story they're getting paid for. If you see value in their story and you're going to accept it and run it, pay them. Pay them at the market value of what you would give anyone else. And don't, because what I often find in our community for people of color, it's trauma pimping, right? For lack of a better word. You know we're going to give you know what's happening in our communities. You're going to take the story, run with it, but you just never compensate us. Or you compensate us in such a meager way that if we don't know how to navigate and understand what the compensation is, we get shafted every single time. So it really comes down to the people in these newsrooms and in these spaces, the editors-in-chief, the publishers, to pay people for what they put out. And there are people who just don't pay. So if you're not getting paid for it takes time to write. It takes time to research and do your story. So they should honor what you're giving to them by compensating you. And don't ask them when they reach out to you, say, okay, send me a contract so that we know exactly what's happening here. What are you paying for this? Versus telling them your story and then asking them after you give it to them, are you paying for this? And they're telling you, no, you're just a part of the community. Do it for the culture.
The amount of people that I have worked with that have given me their stories in terms of essays or whatever, and when they get the reply from me with a 1099, and then they are just like, oh,
I get paid.
I get paid for this?
Right.
And I go,
normalize
yeah.
that.
And it's written into the budget. There's a line item for that level of stuff, and that's, again, working with intentionality.
Normalize it. So yes.
Yes, I have a comment and a question. I don't know which one you wanted to hear first.
You can listen. Comment short, question. Okay.
I guess I'll start with the comment. So I'm Hispanic, and I live in an all-white neighborhood in Northeast Philadelphia, suburban. The Philadelphia Inquirer actually said it was the safest neighborhood in all of Philadelphia, Pine Valley. So that was a comment, that I don't know why I'm saying that, but
Okay.
yeah. So my question is, you guys talk about the problem, which is the gun violence in Philadelphia, but is there a way like the news media can report on the solution?
We've been reporting on the solutions. We have a complete page dedicated to it, 6abc.com/gun violence, I believe, complete page. Every story that
my friends told me not to watch the news because it'll give me nightmares and make me depressed.
Well, there are studies that do show that people who are heavy consumers of news are more likely to view themselves as potential victims of crimes. That's because that's how we psychologically process it. If you don't balance that news viewership with other viewership as well as consuming the stories all the way through the newscast that show a balance of information, then you are going to take in that perspective because it's going to be all that you see. So if you go to that page, the gun violence page, you're going to see not just stories, but hour and half-hour specials and conversations on what solutions could be. I just did a story on Friday. Philly Truce, I love them so much. They put out an album. They dropped an album on Sunday. Just dedicated a couple weeks of resources to shooting a story with them about this album coming out, and we're going to do a longer format piece on that too. So those stories are out there, and we've intentionally been reporting on that because people are tired. We are tired. We're just as tired as you. Think about it. If you're tired of seeing it on your TV, imagine showing up again to another neighborhood, knocking on someone's door who is sick of seeing you and sick of seeing the police in their neighborhood and asking, hey, can you tell me how you feel about this? Like that's the worst thing to have to do, but we have to continue to cover it, A, because we can't sugarcoat reality, and B, maybe this will force people into acknowledging and thinking into a solution. So with that being said, being that we're covering it so much, we know the trauma that it could cause psychologically, as I just mentioned. So that's why we also try to balance it out with showing that there are people working on solutions, and on that same page, if you go, you can put in your suggestion for a solution, and we call people and work on stories with that, with people who say, hey, we're doing karate to keep kids off the streets. Boom, that could be a story.
So the solutions are being implemented.
Absolutely.
Yes. There needs to be accountability in the newsroom and in the community. There needs to be any community, my community, in the suburbs, in the inner city, in center city. There needs to be accountability.
Absolutely, and it's something that we get pushed back against from city officials too about covering gun violence, and they necessarily don't want us to cover it because it doesn't look as great on them, but it's our duty to cover it, but it's also our duty to balance it out and offer solutions for people who are actively trying to work on that.
All right,
Thank you for your question. And I would just say that with WHYY, we were intentional about the way that we wrote the job description for the gun violence prevention reporter. It was collaborative. It was myself. It was Sandy Clark, our former VP of News, Melanie Roy, our former news director, and Katie Colinari, our former assistant news director. And we wrote it gun violence prevention reporter, because we don't want to, we're not telling body count, right? We're not, we're not saying, 23-year-old black man shot 18th and Dickinson, no arrests have been found, and then that's the end of the story. There's enough people doing that, right?
Absolutely.
So we're digging deep. We're building relationships. I think one of the really interesting things we did when Sammy was hired was her first 60 days was no reporting. Just go into the communities and be engaged. A little reporting, but not like turning stories. Yeah.
It was reporting, but I wasn't there sticking a mic.
It was
Right.
faces.
So it was, but it's that level of intentionality of that.
Right.
We know that there's a problem in the way that we cover gun violence.
Yes.
We know people aren't happy about it, and so what can we do differently? So I think, and we also, we hosted the first ever Better Gun Violence Reporting Summit in November of 2019. Brought together journalists and health practitioners and doctors and surgeons to think through this, and so. It's happening. It's not happening everywhere. I mean, there's some outlets in the city that are doing an incredibly bad job at it, and they should be held accountable for it.
Okay, who's next? Oh, we're coming.
All right.
Go ahead.
Hi, I am Sajda Purple Blackwell, by the way. I want to say thank you all. I have to make a comment about WHYY and the NICE program. It is as amazing as you've been hearing it is. Period. The way that they have uplifted regular old community people like me. I'm the first black woman to establish an internet radio station in 2013 in the city of Philadelphia. And that was a challenge. Nobody wanted to respect that because who are you? You're not a real journalist, or you're not a radio personality. So how dare you try to do this? But NICE gives you, a little bit more. They uplift you. They really lift you up so that you can have the audacity to be who you are and know that you do not have to change who you are to fit in this mainstream platform.
Yeah.
So I want to say that. And then secondly, to TaRhonda, do you feel pressure from outlets like WHYY and NICE and what they're doing, uplifting more community? Do you guys at 6ABC or the mainstream media feel a pressure from us and maybe more of a need to include and be inclusive in this community reporting?
I don't know if I would say pressure. I would say accountability, because I'm perfectly okay with admitting that I don't know everything and I don't do everything right. And I think more newsrooms are open to that, where we're looking at NICE, we're looking at your page, we're looking at everything because we want to see what did we miss. And any good newsroom is going to do what did we miss. When I worked at a newspaper, like right after college, one of my jobs was just to watch every single newscast and tell them what stories they had that we didn't have at the newspaper. So I think, if anything, that it's a push to do more and to do what we're missing. So I don't feel it as pressure, because I'm okay with knowing that I'm not right, and I'm okay with learning from what other people are doing. But if it is pressure, it's a good kind of pressure.
And I would say after we did the Confronting the Crisis, both Nikki Hawkins, who's the, I believe, Vice President for Community Engagement there, and Shari Williams, we had a debrief, and they was like, we didn't know a lot of the people that you bought us on this program, and what happened 2 weeks later, you started seeing the people on their air, right?
Yes.
And so people was like, were you mad that they stole your sources? Like, they're not stealing.
Yeah, you
That's
worked, you
not a stealing.
collaborated.
That's the goal.
Yes.
If the goal is to
Yes.
create if the goal is to create a rich ecosystem, then you
Yes.
can't hoard your sources.
Yes.
Right now, if I have somebody who's a whistleblower inside the police department, I'm not going to give you that.
Ah, come on.
But if I know that there are community voices who have, really dedicated their life to thinking about criminal justice or things like that, I don't want them just on NPR.
Absolutely.
I want them on 6ABC. I want them on CBS. I want them on NBC 10. I want them on 1210 AM. I want them on WURD. I
Yep.
want them printed in the Inquirer and
Same.
the
Yep.
Philly Review.
Philadelphia
that.
Sunday Sun,
Sunday
the Scoop,
Sun,
all
of
of
that, the
it.
Scoop, everywhere.
Absolutely.
And so that's the goal. When we talk about an ecosystem, that's how you do it.
Absolutely. All right, we're coming over
And
there.
lastly, I
Hold
just
on.
want to say thank you to Brother Chris Norris and to Eric and to Sandra and everybody at WHYY who continues this mission. It is so important to regular people. I'm still a regular person. It's so important to regular people to know that there is a place for us.
All right, well, thank you. Oh, we need a microphone.
This is dead over here. Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so I know most of you are probably getting sick of seeing me ask questions and everything today. Deal with it. But Denise had actually asked part of what my original questions were going to be. But basically, is there like a large or like obvious disconnect between traditional journalists versus freelance journalists? And then is there any advice that you would give to communications professionals or people that are transitioning into the communications industry from other industries? Because I'm not a traditional,
Okay.
I didn't
Those are
have
two
a
really different
traditional
questions.
transition.
So
Thank
first
you.
of all, with disconnect, I'll be honest and say yes, there is, because typically we have not overlapped until very, very recently in the past couple years. And I don't like, as like Purple, you were talking about like, oh, who are you? And I like the feedback from traditional media. I'm thinking like, you know, why would that feeling come up? Because I felt that way before in the past, but it's because there's this, I don't know, maybe it's an insecurity where I would feel like when someone's just coming over my shoulder, kind of bogarting what I'm doing, that you're saying that what I'm doing isn't good enough. And like, oh, you corny, new, like traditional newsman. And there's a certain level of mutual respect that I think needs to happen. So that's why there hasn't been an overlap, in my opinion, why there hasn't been a divide, because there hasn't been a mutual respect for what mainstream does or for what independent does. So once that mutual respect is developed, then there is more overlap. And that's very, very recently where we're seeing like, dang,
Right.
look at what nice
Not only
is.
is there not a mutual respect, there isn't a mutual understanding, right?
Right.
A lot of the people who are committing acts of journalism don't understand the pressures and the demands of a newsroom and what has to turn and production value and all those other things. And then those who are in the traditional newsrooms don't understand the amount of sweat equity it takes to build that level of trust, right? And to build those community connections. And so it's not just about respect, it's also like, we don't even know what each other do, what we do. And so there has to be more intentionality about creating that opportunity to mix. And so Derek Green and I over at Resolve, raise your hand, Derek, give a shout out. He and I have been talking about one of the things that this ecosystem needs is just more mixers. There's got to be more opportunities for people like you and I and you and Purple just to get together. You know, we had a screening of The Atonement Agenda at the Philadelphia Film Society, and Nikki Hawkins came out. And, you know, it was so nice to meet her, but then she got to meet Dio, right? And Dio got to meet her, and it was like, oh my God, I didn't know these was, so if we got to do more of that, that's also a way of building the ecosystem out.
Yeah, and for your second question, quick answer, I would say be selective, like make connections and be selective about what you pitch and who you reach out to. Don't just like mass blast everybody every day, because we start blocking people. Like.
So I am doing a time check. We have 9 minutes, and there are people who really want to ask questions, so go ahead.
I think that your work is excellent. However, both of you are doing work within larger institutions that the community may not trust, and you're working with individuals inside of your newsroom who do not take the approaches that you take. What do you say to a community member or somebody who comes up and says, I think you're doing great work, but I can't mess with your organization because it's not being done across the board?
That's a wonderful question, and it's something that I've experienced, so I appreciate the question. I tell people, trust me, right? When I got to WHYY, I started, and even with reaching out to nice partners, it was acknowledgement like, look, this place hasn't been welcoming. It hasn't. It wasn't welcoming to me, right? I'll never forget going to WHYY in 2014, and there was an event labeled, you know, it was marketed as 75 of the Regis top journalists. I was the only black man in the room, right? One of the sources that I bought into WHYY, one of the essayists who started writing for us, when I brought him into the building, he was like, I never thought I would be in here. I used to have to wear a suit and sneak in just to be a part of the programming because I didn't think I was welcome here. So I started the conversation with people in the community group with the acknowledgement that we haven't always been the best neighbor. But I'm here. I'm not asking you to trust our CEO. I'm not asking you to trust our VP of News. I'm not asking you to trust the finance department. I'm asking you to trust me. And if then I do you wrong, then you know, write us off. But give me a shot and know that I'm working to transform the culture around the organization.
That's it. That sounds exactly like what, remember I said a few minutes ago, I'm not from here, I don't know it, but if you trust me, I won't do you wrong. And that's how so many people have come into the fold. But I also say, well, tell me, what are we doing wrong? Give me your story suggestions. come be a part of the solution. And a lot of people step back at that point, and I don't get any feedback. But I can take it, like get criticized.
Part of the reason
I'm
why
open
they're
to it.
stepping back, though, is that they've given the feedback and it went nowhere. It went into
But
this vast hole.
You're right in front of me.
Right,
You're
and
not,
so-
you're
so-
not at a secretary. You're not
Right,
at an email.
got
You're
it.
in front of me.
Got it. So they're going to have to see you a little bit more. This is Philly, man. They're tough.
I know.
They,
I mean,
they threw
just
snowballs
now,
at Santa
you know
Claus.
how,
so
you know how
just
I know
know
I made
we're
I
tough.
made it when I was in Reading Terminal Market waiting at my lessees for my ribs, cabbage, and rice and gravy, and a guy came up to me and he pointed. He said, "Keep going," and
Yeah.
he walked off. And I was like,
That's
"Oh
y'all,
wow, I know what he's saying.
You are
I
making
know what
it
he's
here.
saying." Yeah.
All right, something over there. Go ahead.
So 2 questions here. So what is one struggle that you guys are facing to really reach the equity and the depth of conversation that you want to achieve in your organization? And the second question is, not all communities are equal. So which community are you struggling with the most
Great
here in
question.
Philly?
Great question.
With representation for a community? Yeah, I feel my admitted shortcoming is I think I don't do enough representing the Hispanic population, and I know I have not made a good a good dent in that, and knowing I've got a few people in places, but I feel like that's something that I can work harder at, and the language barrier is no excuse, but I feel like I have some niches there, but I feel like I could do more in that. And the question about equity, I think the biggest challenge that I see is that it's just so big. And we could have all the goals. I could have all the goals I want, but I'm one person. So the challenge in it being so big and on so many levels and beyond news, beyond even the newsroom, it's going to take a whole lot of hands on deck. I think that's the biggest challenge in terms of getting people across different platforms to understand it. First, because not everybody understands or believes that equity is important. Come on, go on Twitter.
Even in
Every time I tweet
2022.
about equity, it has been a block party this year with all the stuff that I do on DEI, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to listen to these people. But everyone doesn't understand and believe it. Now, that's not what I'm saying for my newsroom, but it's just it's so big, and you have to attack it on so many levels. I think that's the biggest challenge.
So let's take one more question over here, and then I have to wrap up. And we'll talk a little bit. Put your stuff in the parking lot, please, so we can, have some conversations about it. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. I'm the president of NAHJ Philly, and the question is related to what you just said.
Can you tell people what NAHJ Philly stands for?
The National Association of Hispanic Journalists, Philadelphia chapter. And my question is related to language access. And, a lot of times equity and engagement is framed in terms of race. But, we have a lot of ethnic media and, communities that speak English as a second language or don't speak English at all. And that was especially challenging during the census, right? Like getting people counted, and also during the elections, because a lot of those people are also able to vote. How are you working to address those barriers? Because that is a big part of outreaching our communities, right? Is having information in both languages. And one of the things that we struggle with is, this concept that all media has to be in one language, right? When we've seen many examples of bilingual journalism and even stations like KFAI in Minneapolis that have over 10 languages represented from all of their various communities. Philadelphia has so many immigrant populations, and yet our media is entirely siloed. How does that apply in your engagement work, and what can we do to not just address language access, but people with disabilities, people who aren't digitally literate, people that don't have access to housing, people who are experiencing poverty, which is, those are the people that, to me, it's transcend race, right? And it's like we're experiencing multiple marginalizations right now. And I just wonder if that, is part of your long-term vision and strategy for engaging all of these underrepresented populations.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, it is part of the long-term vision, and yes, it's probably one of our biggest challenges right now. Is being able to be equitable in terms of language and be accessible. But it's something that we think about. which I think is part of it. I mean, we have active conversations with the Germantown Deaf Ministry, right? About like when we do our big conversations, how do we make sure we have an interpreter there? You know, how do we find, you know, translation services so that when we are putting out important information about COVID, it's also in Spanish and all those other types of things. I don't know any news organization, honestly, in the city that's doing that well. You know, we certainly aren't, but it's something that we think about. It's something that we're striving for. It's absolutely on the list of things to do. And
it too depends on the market, what the market demands. So in Denver, the Hispanic population is really large and growing every day. So there's more of a demand to provide that bilingual format, whether it be in commercials and newscasts. And the station I work for, like, we had to get sound bites in Spanish too. So I use a little bit of my Espanol that I learned in Louisiana, so it sounds like that, to get sound bites and things. But also there were people in managerial roles who were part of the community and had their ear to the street who could help grow it. So I think it varies by market, and it's something that we would need help with, you know, in terms of figuring out what the shortcomings are and how to grow. So that's why we need to hear things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just add,
Like
shout out. I'm sorry, I was going to say shout out to Eric Marsh for the reminder. But even within the NICE program, right, we have Emma Restrepo. I don't know if she's still in the room, for Dos Puntos Radio. You know, we have the Friends, Peace and Sanctuary Journal, which is the first Arabic-speaking publishing newspapers. We have 4 languages represented in the NICE program, and we're trying to figure out how to create the integration on that level too.
Right. You know, that's what radical thinking does. Radical thought says, I know we've always done things a certain way. We're going to continue to do this a certain way. We'll follow the pattern and the people that have always been good to us. But radical thought process says we have to now reach the people who are getting their news from other places. You know, radical thought says we want to make sure we invite and openly create spaces for them to be a part of what we do every single day. So Christopher Norris, WHYY Managing Editor for Community and Engagement, and TaRhonda Thomas, 6ABC Race and Culture Reporter, thank you so much for what became an engaging session. And if the two of you connect after this, you owe me credit. I need credit.
It's going to be trouble.